But I wanted to take you to the White House, their official website, because I want to read this to you guys verbatim. Okay, this is a legitimate piece of a memorandum from the White House from Joe Biden himself. Now, I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs, but it's a very alarming because this administration is attempting to regulate speech. They're getting closer and closer and closer. Obviously, big tech doesn't care. But this is pretty alarming. Even if you call yourself a liberal or a libertarian, there's language in here that is very, very scary. Now, let's take a look at it. Memorandum condemning and combating racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. Advancing inclusion and belonging for people of all races, national origins, and ethnicities is critical to guaranteeing the safety and security of the American people. During the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, inflammatory and xenophobic rhetoric has put Asian American and Pacific Islander persons, families, communities, and businesses at risk. Or maybe Democrats just put their businesses to death. The federal government must recognize that it has played a role, you think, in furthering these xenophobic sentiments through the actions of political leaders, including references to the virus pandemic by the geographic location of its origin. You guys know what I'm talking about. I don't even know if I can say this on YouTube because we might get demonetized, but Donald Trump used the virus, okay? Such statements have stoked unfounded fears and perpetuated stigma about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and have contributed to increasing rates of bullying, harassment, and hate crimes against these groups of people. These actions defied the best practices and guidelines of public health officials and have caused significant harm to these families and communities that must be addressed. Now, I want to scroll down to these sections that Biden begins to executively, put forward. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered as follows. Section 1, condemning racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Okay, of course. I'm with you, Joe. I'll condemn racism any day of the week. The federal government has a responsibility to prevent racism. What does that mean? Xenophobia and intolerance against everyone in America. What does that mean? You see how this isn't defined? It's extremely vague. What does that mean? Does that mean the FBI is going to start spying on people that they deem racist, tapping their phones? Including Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. My administration condemns and denounces acts of racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against these communities. Okay, right on, Joe. I'm right there with you on that last part, but not that part before because you're being very vague. Section number 2, combating racism. Now, pay attention to this. This is language. Don't let this fly over your head. This is dangerous language right here. Combating racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The Secretary of Health and Human Services shall, in coordination with the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force, consider issuing guidance describing best practices for advising cultural competency, language access, and sensitivity towards Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the context of the federal government's COVID-19 response. Now look at this. So they want to launch the Human Health and Human Services to start to enforce this kind of stuff with the Health Equity Task Force. Now look at this, okay? This is dangerous. In developing any such guidance, the secretary should consider the best practices set forth by public health organizations and experts for mitigating racially discriminatory language in describing the COVID-19 pandemic. What do health organizations have to do with mitigating any kind of language whatsoever? regardless of what's taking place. You guys see how this is so, let's one more time. Let me read that one more time. In developing any such guidance, the secretary should consider the best practices set forth by public. So this means practices. They're going to consider how you should live your life in regards and relation to speech, set forth by public health organizations, and experts. Who the hell are these experts? Are they radical leftists that get to deem whomever they decide or get to declare whatever is xenophobic? Who are these experts? For mitigating racially discriminatory language, speech, language, speech, in describing the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's pull out of this. This is dangerous. This is an executive memo that has been drawn up, signed. This is on the official White House website that is describing, regulating, activating these public health organizations by mitigating or advising the public their speech. Now, this is, okay, now people might be saying, Drew, you're kind of overreacting. Is that really censoring? This is getting closer and closer and normalizing to the public that the federal government has the ability to activate these organizations, a health organization, to mitigate to the public their language and their speech. What's next? What's next? The federal government is giving power to public organizations to mitigate speech to the public? Welcome to 2021, because what is next? We're getting closer and closer and closer and closer to full freedom of speech. We're going to be in a police state soon. Who are these public health organizations? What are their political affiliations? What are their biases? What do they believe? Who are the experts, Joe? How is it the federal government's responsibility to combat racism? Okay, I get it. That's a good thing. But what does that mean? Does that mean freedom of speech gets silenced? Does that mean that freedom of expression are these? But what does a public health organization have to do with mitigating somebody's language in America? Subversion. This is subversion. And there might be people saying, Drew, I think you're kind of overreacting. I think you're kind of overstretching it. Really? Really? This is policy that I'm showing you. This is the stuff that creeps into society and it changes our lives. And it's interesting that Joe Biden quotes, by the power vested in me, according to the Constitution. He takes a shot directly at the First Amendment right away. This is dangerous territory. This is dangerous territory. And they said that President Trump was the fascist. They said that President Trump was the one that was a dictator. President Trump did not sign any policy that came anywhere near language like that. Because that's just tiptoeing closer and closer. Oh, you're going to use public health organizations to mitigate speech and to recommend how people should talk? What's next? If we don't listen, if people don't listen to that, what is next, Joe? What is next? How are you going to enforce people's language when they don't listen to you or they don't listen to the public health organizations? And I'm not here defending racism. My thing is, who defines what racism is in 2021? Listen, I get accused of being a white supremacist all the time. All the freaking time. And I'm brown. I'm Latino. It's the stupidest thing that I've ever beheld on Twitter. Is these crazy, ridiculous, journalists that are grifters trying to build a career by attacking me. They will literally post things on Twitter saying, Drew Hernandez, white supremacist, blah, 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 blah. Are those the kinds of experts, Joe, that are going to be regulating in the federal government who's a racist and who's not? Are those the types of people in the public health organization that are going to be mitigating language when it comes to what's racist and what's not? Who gets to define what that is and what that means. Why don't they display that? Why don't they define that? Because it is convenient for them to leave that out until it begins to happen. I'm not here defending racism. I just want to know who the hell are the ones that define what is racist, what is xenophobic, and hey, I'm not here going to defend racism, but I will always defend freedom of speech. You may disagree with speech. You may hate certain speech. It's interesting, huh? All these leftists are like, we hate hate speech. We hate hate speech. We hate. It's like, you hate? You hate? You're condemning hate with hate. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa, did someone just get red pilled right now? It's like, are you condemning hate with hate? You know, it's like, dude, listen to what people are saying. I will always be an advocate for free speech. Speech I disagree with, speech that I think is evil, speech that I think is aggressive towards me and my race. Of course I despise that. Do you think I like to see, people online, racists online talking about Hispanics? And dude, I see it all the time. Just get off of some of these social networks. You'll find it. You think I like to see that? Of course not. I despise it. But it's still their First Amendment right to say it, because we have the First Amendment right to turn around and start to literally construct arguments to show how they are stupid. That's how freedom of speech works. And it's not only just talking about things. It's not only having the freedom to say what you want, which is a God-given right and is beautiful. But freedom of speech is a double-edged sword. On one side, it's your freedom to say what you want and not be silenced or censored. But on the other end of that microphone is the freedom to hear. Because whenever censorship begins to come, they're not only silencing voices, they're clogging ears. Because once a voice is silenced, there are people in the world that may have wanted to hear what that person said. And whenever censorship comes, that is what is being suppressed. That is what is being destroyed. People's ability to speak, but also people's ability to hear that speak. And that is important. That is why these tech companies do everything in their power to suppress, deboost, demonetize, take people off of platforms with speech that they disagree with or whatever they determine. I'll give you this. Imagine if the United States of America functioned the way that big tech functions in 2021 in terms of speech. It's a scary thought, isn't it? The president of the United States has been deplatformed off of Twitter. A sitting president, Donald J. Trump, was deplatformed and silenced on Twitter. Now imagine if that was offline in the real world.